Hello, hello, hello. So today we will be focusing on a very good thing called fascism. I'm joking. A very nasty thing called fascism. The reason I'm focusing on it is that the lessons of 1945, the Rwandan genocide and the genocide in Cambodia seems to have been forgotten in these recent times. So I would like to remind people of how bad things can get, and it is up to all of us to keep our collective fingers on the pulse of any organization or government or person who seems to have like some fascist tendencies. So what I would like to do today is, first I'm going to go through what is fascism, the scholarly attributes and definitions of fascism, and then I'm going to do a comparison with an organization called Solidarity in South Africa. It's an NGO, and before they sue me because they've got a strong litigation arm, they are not fully fascist, okay? They seem to be maybe proto-fascist or not fascist at all. We'll go through the script. But essentially, they are very nationalistic with regards to Afrikaner rights. And as soon as there's a healthy level of nationalism. If you're from the UK and the UK is playing football against Spain or something, and you paint the Union Jack on your face and you wear some crazy like British hat or whatever, you've got a Union Jack waving it around, that's healthy nationalism. You take your nationalism to the football field, and like, as long as you're not a hooligan, but like if you just, paint your face and you sing your anthem like full chested, nothing wrong with that, If you have a strong, boisterous verbal argument against someone who is like, trashing your country, or bad-mouthing your country in front of you, that's healthy. You're just like pushing back. If they are wrong, of course, like if they're just stating facts, it's facts. But if they are lying and making propaganda, it's within your full right to defend your country or your group or your leader. That's healthy nationalism. But there are pernicious turns in fascism. So let's begin. Point 1, introduction. Since its formation in 2001, Solidarity South Africa has become one of the most influential minority advocacy organizations in post-apartheid South Africa. Positioned as a trade union and a civil rights movement rooted in Afrikaner cultural identity, Solidarity is part of a broader constellation known as the Solidarity Movement, which includes AfriForum, the Solidarity Helping Hand, the Soltech Technical College, and Academia, a private Afrikaans university. While Solidarity presents itself as a non-partisan organization advocating for minority rights, community upliftment, and cultural preservation, critics argue that its activities reflect a deeper ideological project aimed at parallel institutionalism and ethnic consolidation under the liberal legal framework. So, full disclosure, I am an Afrikaans person, okay? And not everything that Solidarity does I disagree with. For example, for me, language rights are very important, and it's not just my own language. I think language rights are important for, let's say, Native Australians, for Native Americans, for rare languages in Asia and Europe. Because if you lose these rare languages, like a part of human history and culture dies. This is just a fact. If you go and look at countries that have been swarmed by a single language, like specifically English, and to a lesser extent, Chinese and Spanish, you'll see that a culture that would have been thriving 1,000 years ago, or a group of people, they were forced to speak a certain language. Like, let's say when Spain colonized Argentina, essentially, like they had what they call these like reductions, and they forced the population to speak Spanish. And the British did it as well, the Americans, well, the USA is pretty good at it too. And, you know, all of this cultural richness then has been lost. So with regards to language, I support solidarity, but let's go through the other things. Like, for me, an issue is that why can't they be independent from AfriForum, which we have noticed isn't a fascist organization, AfriForum, but they have some proto-fascist characteristics. So that for me is a problem with solidarity. So to what extent, if any, does Solidarity South Africa exhibit characteristics commonly associated with fascist movements, as defined by political theorists including Robert Paxton, Umberto Eco, and Stanley Payne? While Solidarity does not engage in paramilitary violence, nor does it seek control of the state, it does promote a highly organized, culturally exclusive, and increasingly autonomous alternative system within South African society, educationally, legally, and economically. These features raise questions about ethno-pluralism, soft separatism, and the ideological underpinnings of its projects. So we will differentiate between legitimate minority rights advocacy within the democratic framework and exclusionary nationalism that may reflect fascist adjacent behavioral traits. So now for the boring part, the definition of fascism in global context. But look, the definition of fascism is important. It's like if you go to the doctor and you're sick with a flu, he's going to check your throat, he's going to, I don't know, listen to your lungs, you know, and he will basically diagnose you accordingly to whatever is wrong with you. And if it is indeed the flu, he will give you like medication for that. So we have to first define fascism in a global context, because there's always like these, markers of fascism. So fascism has appeared in many cultural and political forms, from Mussolini's Italy to Franco's Spain, from Imperial Japan to Chile under Pinochet. Despite surface differences, political theorists identify core patterns of behavior, structure, and rhetoric that define fascist movements. So, 2.1, Paxton's behavioral definition. In The Anatomy of Fascism, 2004, Robert Paxton defines fascism not by ideology alone, but as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity. Key elements include the myth of national humiliation, cultural purity, a mass-based nationalist movement, a rejection of pluralism and liberal democracy, propensity for creating parallel institutions, pursuit of cleansing or redemptive national projects. Cultural purity, I have a problem with that, like in the sense that, a huge problem, in the sense that this almost sounds like blood purity, which is Adolf Hitler's words, and like genetic blood purity is insane. Like it's an abomination against the libertarian view that, you are free to do what you wish. You can do within the law, the framework of the law. And a lot of these fascist movements, this is one of the very first, markers how you can notice a fascist movement. It's like this purity thing. Like, once again, I don't really have a massive problem with someone who, likes to, keep it in the family. That is, or at least if they are concerned that, let's say, massive cultural differences in a family or a village will cause strife. Maybe that's a legitimate concern, but to aggressively pursue so-called purity or cultural purity, for me, is a sin. 2.2, Umberto Eco's Eurofascism. Eco's Eurofascism, 1995, identifies 14 characteristics of what he calls eternal fascism, including a cult of tradition and purity, fear of difference, obsession with plots and scapegoats, rejection of modernism and liberal pluralism, hostility to intellectuals and diversity, authoritarianism without ideology, like a way of organizing power. So, scapegoating, for example, is also a very strong indicator, especially if it's a minority. Like, for example, what Hitler did to the Jews, and Mussolini did with the socialists, like essentially just saying, "Oh, everything is your fault." Even if it's, even if you can clearly state or prove that it's not. They will go and they'll do it anyway, and they will use the method of repetition, where they will state the same thing over and over and over again until your brain starts breaking down, or your mental process, and then you'll just basically agree with them. So 2.3, Payne and Sternal on cultural fascism. Stanley Payne and Zeev Sternal argues that fascist movements are often cultural and nationalist in expression before becoming authoritarian in function. They build mythical identities rooted in history, parallel education and communication systems, ethnocultural hierarchies disguised as civil society. These characteristics are especially visible in non-state actors and ethnic advocacy organizations that function politically, but not electorally. Yes, mythic identities. It's like Modi's India, for example, where they, it's so stupid, where they apparently changed textbooks to bring in a lot of religion into science. So at one stage, what I've read is that they took, somewhere in what the Hindu holy scripts called the Vedas, there's some god who flew around in a chariot, and they used that to try to prove that, India was the first country to basically invent flight. Which is ridiculous. I also like to refer to it as cornerstones. So there may be a perceived injustice in the past. I don't know if those of you have seen Westworld, the sci-fi series, but each character in Westworld has a so-called cornerstone which identifies their personality or forms their personality. So this is very similar. You find something or someone and you blame your problems or that on them, or you find some mythical inspiration from it, and you create this myth. Now quite often this is a benign myth. For example, some native Australians believe like everyone arrived in Australia on the back of a giant turtle. The Irish believe that St. George drove all the snakes in Ireland into the sea. These beliefs hurt no one and nobody. This is just like, and not quite often probably people don't even believe in it, like people from Ireland or Australia, but these things are not, dangerous. But as soon as you get someone like Adolf Hitler who's like, oh, Aryanism, we originated in some Heimland and, migrated west, and, this is why we use the swastika. It's complete bollocks, like he sucked it out of his thumb and now it becomes a national myth. So now 3, Solidarity South Africa, origins, structure and ideological identity. 3.1, historical background and founding. Solidarity, or in Afrikaans, this is one name I can't slaughter because I'm Afrikaans and I can speak it obviously. Solidariteit was officially founded in 2001, emerging from the merger of the Afrikaans trade unions with deep roots in Christian nationalist ideology, such as the MW, Mine Workers Union, which dates back to the early 1900s. During apartheid, the MW was aligned with the ruling National Party and defended Afrikaner workers' interests within the racialized labor system. Post-apartheid, Solidarity rebranded itself as a trade union operating within the Constitution, a civil rights organization defending minority language, cultural and educational rights, a self-reliant community builder focused on Afrikaner empowerment. The organization grew in parallel with AfriForum, which was launched in 2006, so that's 5 years later, as its legal and advocacy arm. So yeah, Solidarity seems to be the labor movement or the greater umbrella movement, where AfriForum is the advocacy and the legal movement. So yeah, AfriForum is kind of like then the more powerful of the two. 3.2, structure and subdivisions. Solidarity is part of a broader movement, often referred to as the Solidarity Movement, which includes AfriForum, a legal advocacy, litigation, and media engagement. Soltech, a private technical college for Afrikaans speakers. Academia, a private university emphasizing Christian and Afrikaans values. And Helping Hand, a welfare organization assisting predominantly white Afrikaans communities. Now it's so difficult not to be biased. For me, like, I don't see why. I'm not a capitalist per se. I'm also not really a socialist per se, but I don't see why a private capital cannot start an organization to promote a language, like in the sense of like a school, a university, like. And especially also if you bring in like religion, like Christianity, would there be, a massive brouhaha if, let's say, the Apache tribe in the United States, if they use private capital and they start a university only teaching in the Apache language? I doubt it. So, and you have to really think about what exactly is wrong with it. Helping Hands is a welfare organization assisting predominantly white communities. That's kind of like, I think, if you're unemployed or if you're dying in poverty. The South African state, once again, I think I said it in my farm murder videos, and I said it with the AfriForum video. The South African state's useless. Luckily, we're not a failed state yet, thank God. But like, they're useless. They're so useless. And I think this is one thing where every South African can literally agree upon. they're useless. Like if you want something done, like literally the phrase, if you want something done, do it yourself, is so applicable to the South African state. So it's no surprise that organizations will then hatch and fill the spaces left, as a vacuum left open by the state. Now, here lies the converse. Here lies the problem, I think, that some people will have with it, or what I've heard and read. There is some ethics around this. Because of South Africa's history of apartheid, where we also had blood purity light, okay, like Budweiser light, blood purity light, a form of Nazism. Apartheid was a form of Nazism with Christianity in it to make it more legal and trying to abide by international rules and stuff like that. But it was still pretty pernicious and awful, internationally illegal, unethical, what have you. And South Africa is still reeling from its effects. It will still reel from its effects for a while. The ANC has not made it any better since they came to power. However, since we have this history, maybe if you are in a privileged position, if you have enough money to send your kid to a private university, doesn't a private enterprise have some responsibility to the broader community? And that means everyone, including black people who speak a different language. If you look at marketing and strategy, in MBA books and stuff like that, they talk about corporate responsibility very often. And for me, this is corporate responsibility. I'm not saying make half of the university black. I'm saying like make some scholarships, maybe 10% of the scholarships for really needy students who have performed well at school and need a helping hand. Because I've said this and I will say it like a million times, cyclical poverty, once you break cyclical poverty, you have the tools to slowly start moving into the direction of these Nordic countries. And that's where you want to be. So and the same with this helping hand thing. Great initiative, but how ethical is it? I don't know. Like, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm just not going to talk about this any further because I simply don't understand. So 3.3, ideological messaging. Solidarity presents its mission in constitutional, rights-based language, but its deeper ideological pillars include Afrikaner cultural preservation, opposition to race-based legislation such as BEE or now it's triple BEE, broad-based black economic empowerment, and EE, or employment equity. EE, for those of you who don't know, is DEI. Support for Afrikaans as a public and academic language, and private parallel institutional building to serve its community independently of state failure or ideological interference. Yeah, the South African state has some interesting takes on history, but that's another video. Notable public statements include rejection of the idea that apartheid was uniquely evil. For example, Kali Kriel's 2019 claim that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. I think it was 1976, the United Nations General Assembly ruled that by a large margin, ruled that it was a crime against humanity. So let's not get confused. Regular assertions that Afrikaners are facing systematic exclusion in the name of transformation. A consistent narrative of victimhood, arguing that white Afrikaners are being denied fair access to education, jobs, and public institutions. Okay, this is their claims, but I know for a fact that Afrikaans unemployment is 7%, which pales in comparison to the national average of between 30 to 40%, depending on how you may measure it. I'm going to do a video on unemployment. That video will age so badly because it will change all the time, right? So I will give numbers and maybe rather make a podcast about it, but it's ridiculous. This narrative is reinforced through documentaries, school content, litigation campaigns, and solidarity events that often highlight Afrikaans trauma and resilience. I just want to say Afrikaners has had some trauma and they are resilient. This is a fact. South Africa is struck quite often by disasters like droughts and these things, wars. And Afrikaners have existed through these things. That's why, that's another reason I'm so skeptical about not the right. I don't have a problem with right-leaning people. A lot of my friends are right-leaning. I have a problem with the far right, who basically states that, we have to escape the country, or there's white genocide, or shit like that, because Afrikaners are resilient. We have lived in South Africa for 400 years. Okay, if we were weak, we wouldn't have made it that long. It's logical. So, it's nonsense that they concocted in their own heads, or from books, or from fucking Tucker Carlson, or from 8chan or 4chan, or all these other stupid places. With the regards to Afrikaner trauma, the British did invade, and the Dutch did invade South Africa several times. So there is some trauma, not like the trauma the Jews experienced during World War II, or the Armenians experienced during the Turkish annihilation. The Turks almost annihilated the entire Armenian population, by the way. But no one. That's another annoying thing. Is the Armenians get almost no attention in the world. But that's a tangent. Number 4. Point-by-point comparison, solidarity, and fascist characteristics. This is my favorite part. 4.1. Myth of decline and cultural victimhood. Fascist movements typically anchor their legitimacy in a narrative of national or cultural decline, accompanied by a call for restoration. Paxton describes this as a response to community humiliation and decline, used to justify radical change. Solidarity frequently advances this claim that Afrikaners are under siege in post-apartheid South Africa. Afrikaners are portrayed as victims of reverse discrimination through BEE and employment equity policies. Afrikaners are described as being systematically erased from public universities. Affirmative action is framed as racial punishment rather than redress. I want to slightly agree with one of these points that South African universities have become only English. Now, I fully understand the practicality of this move, that, it's cheaper and more practical to do it in one language. But still, all South African cultural heritage is slowly being erased, and we're slowly becoming a form of a Anglo-Saxon country because we're all going to speak English in the end. So, do we really want that? Do we really want to give up our identity? The organization frequently invokes cultural trauma, including farm attacks, loss of language status, and marginalization in public institutions. This creates a narrative of minority group being erased, which resembles fascist myth making. I just want to say this BE thing is often pushed out of context. I got my driver's license and passport just the other day, and I went to the Department of Internal Affairs to get it, and there were quite a few white people there. And was the Department of Transportation, no, the place where you get the driver's license, and there were white people there, the army now, actually, the South African army and the police want more white people. I stated it previously in one video. They like to balance out races within the security forces for obvious reasons. Like if there's underrepresentation of a race, if there is like an issue, let's say someone gets pulled off by the police for drunk driving, and it's like a mixed ethnicity police patrol, the probability of there being a misunderstanding is lower. If the army is like mixed race, comprises various races, then if they are needed, you can't say this is like a militia or this is an illegitimate force. It represents the country. So at least for the police and the army, there's a deficit of Afrikaans people. So, okay, I can't go to the police or the army. I'm way too old, except maybe a desk job, something like that. But if you're like 18 or something, and especially if you've got some technical training, probably you'll be able to get into the army or the police. 4.2, ethnic nationalism and cultural purity. Fascism emphasizes the need to preserve or restore cultural purity, often centered on exclusive ethnic or linguistic identity. Solidarity promotes 1. Exclusive Afrikaans language education through academia and Soltech. That's the two buildings they have made. Internal media and textbooks that reflect Afrikaner historical narratives, and parallel community institutions aimed at self-reliance outside of the state. While Solidarity claims to defend minority rights, its institutions are ethnically and linguistically homogeneous. There is little evidence of meaningful diversity in its leadership, education, or outreach structures. So, I missed it totally. With regards to the myth of decline and cultural victimhood, there's a strong alignment. We are not in decline, and our victimhood is marginal. So there is therefore with Solidarity a strong alignment with the fascist myth of decline and victimhood. You can go and watch my farm attack videos on it, and my white genocide video, where I use extensive numbers and dates and sources to verify this claim. With regards to the ethnic nationalism and cultural purity, if you just start university, with private capital, that is not a crime. So here we only have partial alignment, positioned as civil rights advocacy, but promotes de facto cultural exclusivity. 4.3, leadership structure and internal control. Fascist organizations are usually hierarchically controlled, with top-down authority and little room for dissent. Solidarity is headed by Flip Buys, the founder. Now remember, they were founded in 2001. And Dirk Herman, current CEO, with strong ideological continuity over 20 plus years. There is no evidence of internal ideological debate or leadership challenge. Messaging is strategically disciplined and consistent across all branches of the movement. While this is not inherently fascist, the lack of internal pluralism combined with top-down messaging across its legal, educational and media arms create an insular environment. Partial alignment, highly centralized, though non-violent. Yeah, I've never heard of internal disagreements spilling over into the public arena. Whereas with the DA, the Democratic Alliance, which is a political party, and with the ANC, which is the ruling governing party, their dirty laundry is always washed in the public. Something is always leaked, and this is incidentally why they are not fascist, is because even although they may try to keep some of these things secret, some people just leak it. Some people in those organizations feel that, this is right or that is wrong, and they leak it to the media. So that keeps the ANC and the DA firmly in the camp of being non-fascist. Okay, next up, 4.4, rejection of pluralism and integration. A central fascist trait is hostility to pluralism, the idea that diverse societies can coexist under a shared civic identity. Solidarity opposes BEE and employment equity, curricular reform that includes Afrikaans languages or histories, public schooling where Afrikaans is not the primary language, transformation at institutions like Stellenbosch University. Rather than advocating integration, Solidarity advances parallelisms, a separate system that avoids the complexities of integration by replicating state functions for a single ethnocultural group. So the problem here is, once again, protecting your language and culture is one thing, but for example, at universities, you get this student housing, the fraternities and sororities in American English, corsays in Afrikaans. And there's a huge amount of hazing in those areas. And it is alleged that, it just pops into the media quite frequently, that some of these hazing incidents get out of hand quite quickly, and mostly the recipients are black. Usually, do you see where the problem lies? If they were only white, they wouldn't have been an issue. And they do create a perception on social media as soon as, for example, if they talk about BE, or they talk about integration or the universities, go and have a look at social media, like Facebook, like Twitter. That's actually why some South African newspapers like News 24 have removed the comment section of most of their stories, because it's a toxicity bomb. It's a nuclear weapon. It's like a nuclear war between Pakistan and India. The amount of racism from both sides, but Afrikaners in particular, is astounding. The stuff, and then it usually comes from obviously anonymous accounts, and this creates this perception. This just creates the optics of and the argument for a lot of let's say black bloc podcasters to say that this is definitely a fascist organization. And I cannot really disagree. Here I have a strong alignment with fascist tendencies towards ethno-pluralism and separatism. 4.5, creation of parallel institutions. Fascist movements often build parallel institutions, schools, unions, courts, media, especially in contexts where they distrust the state. Solidarity has developed Soltech, an Afrikaans college, Academia, a private Christian Afrikaans university, AfriForum, a legal and public advocacy arm, Helping Hands, welfare services, and Forum News, internal news network. This private infrastructure mimics state function, while legal. It reflects a deliberate withdrawal from public pluralist institutions, raising the question, is this civil society resilience or soft ethno-nationalism? So this is a interesting question. It lies on a cusp. But since there's so many, there's like, you have the universities, you have the welfare, you have the litigation arm, all of these things coming together creates for a strong alignment with fascist institutional parallelism. 4.6, historical revisionism and traditionalism. Fascist ideologies often sanitizes or glorifies aspects of a troubled past. Umberto Eco writes of a cult of tradition that resists critical reinterpretation of history. Solidarity and its affiliates have opposed the removal of apartheid-era monuments and names, have disputed that apartheid was a crime against humanity, for example, Kali Krul in 2019, promote curricula emphasizing Afrikaner contributions while downplaying apartheid structural violence. This form of education, cultural nostalgia aligns with fascist ideal of returning to the lost moral order. So, yeah, there is a lot of Afrikaans people want to do this, like, historical revisionism because of guilt and shame around apartheid, or maybe pride also about apartheid, and there is therefore a strong alignment with the historical revisionism and traditionalism. 4.7, militarism and security culture. Fascism historically promotes order, hierarchy, and security through military imagery and alliances. Solidarity does not operate militias, but is closely aligned with AfriForum's Neighborhood Watch and security networks. Self-defense rhetoric around farm attacks and community protection. Public discussions about state failure and the need for Afrikaans self-protection. While this remains non-militant, the forms resemble pre-militia organization frameworks common in early fascist movements. So, yeah, this is just private security, people taking care of themselves because the state is so pathetic, and therefore there's only a partial alignment. They are not a military organization, just a security organization. 4.8, media control and intellectual conformity. Fascist movements often suppress intellectual dissent and promote ideological conformity through in-house media. Solidarity's media and messaging are centralized and tightly controlled. Promote an ideological coherent narrative across education, welfare, and the legal spheres. Rarely platform dissenting voices or critical historians. There is no independent academic oversight of Soltech or academia's curriculums. Their communications avoid pluralistic debate and emphasizes cultural loyalty over critical engagement. So therefore there's a partial alignment with the informational echo chamber, but without state censorship. 4.9, use of legalism over violence. Unlike classical fascist regimes which uses physical violence, Solidarity relies on lawfare. Legal challenges to government policies, IEC, court action, IEC, that's Independent Electoral Commission, and court actions, and appeals to the Constitution to defend its parallel institutions. This rule-based strategy distinguishes Solidarity from violent fascist regimes. However, legalism can also serve exclusionary goals, what Jason Stanley calls legal authoritarianism, when it shields a privileged group from transformative state action. So here we have a partial alignment, no violence, but institutional entrenchment of cultural power. This is also reminiscent of what Jacob Zuma does from the MK party, which we said was a proto-fascist party. Lawfare, just like using the courts. South Africa do have independent courts, but using the courts to go as far as you can, but not necessarily using it in an ethical way. Remember, there's nothing wrong with like opening a lawsuit, but you can still be unethical. So the summary table of solidarity and fascist traits. First, I'll mention the fascist trait, then I'll mention the solidarity alignment. Myth of decline and cultural victimhood, strong. Ethnic nationalism and cultural purity, partial. Authoritarian leadership structure, partial. Rejection of pluralism, strong. Parallel institutions, strong. Historical revisionism, strong. Militarism and security culture, partial. Media and intellectual control, partial. Political violence, none. So, here we have 4 strong alignments and 4 partial alignments and 1 no alignment with political violence, luckily. So, next up, the differences and limitation in the fascism analogy. So, with all of these videos I made about fascism for the MK, EFF, AfriForum Solidarity, I think I'm going to make one about the ANC as well, and the DA just for shits and giggles. They're all proto-fascist because you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Remember, to be fully fascist, you need to have state control. Like Francoist Spain or Chile's Pinochet, you need to have state control. Without state control, you cannot be fascist, per definition. That's like probably the greatest definition. So while solidarity displays multiple traits that resembles fascist political behavior, especially around cultural exclusivity, institutional parallelism, and historical revisionism, it is not accurate to classify the movement as fascist in its full form. Several important distinctions limit the applicability of the label. 5.1. No aspirations for state power or totalitarian control. Fascist parties seek to capture and or overthrow the state. Solidarity operates explicitly outside of state structures, emphasizing private autonomy, not centralization, civil independence, not political dominance. It does not field candidates, seek control of parliament, or aim to govern South Africa. It functions as a parallel civil society, not a political party. Thus, there is no alignment. It avoids totalitarian power. 5.2. Absence of paramilitary violence. Fascism often escalates through the use of force, including street violence and paramilitary units. Solidarity uses legal advocacy, not coercion. It promotes security partnerships, but not militias. And it does not advocate for violence or physical confront of opponents. While its rhetoric occasionally leans towards self-defense narratives, it has never crossed the threshold into fascist violence. Therefore, is no alignment. 5.3. Private funding and market liberalism. Classical fascism often aligns with state corporatism or controlled economies. Solidarity is privately funded by members and donors, committed to market-based education and employment, opposed to state-driven economic planning. Its model is closer to communitarian mobilization than communitarian neoliberalism than fascist economic authoritarianism. Thus, there's no alignment but with private funding and market liberalism. 5.4. Religious conservatism is not fascism. Solidarity's cultural outlook is informed by Christian nationalism, especially in academia's curriculum. Academia is the university they have. This is sometimes conflated with fascism, but religious conservatism alone does not meet fascist criteria, unless it is 1. Tied to political authoritarianism, 2. Used to justify racial or military domination, and weaponized for state control. In Solidarity's case, religious conservatism supports cultural autonomy, not theocratic control. Therefore, this is contextually distinct. South Africa is a very Christian country. It's a very religious country with Christianity dominant in particular. 80% of the population identifies with Christianity. It is thus not surprising that a conservative organization like Solidarity would promote Christianity. So that doesn't make you fascist. So Solidarity South Africa presents itself as a legally grounded, culturally proud, and constitutionally compliant organization dedicated to minority rights, particularly for Afrikaners. It has established one of the most extensive private civil society networks in post-apartheid South Africa, complete with schools, universities, welfare systems, legal services, and media outlets. However, this parallel structure, while non-violent, raises important questions about inclusion, identity, and democratic pluralism. Solidarity's rhetoric of victimhood, its cultural exclusivity, and its rejection of transformative justice initiatives place it in ideological proximity to early fascist movements, especially in their pre-militant civil society phase. Key areas of alignment include the myth of cultural decline and betrayal, ethnic self-reliance over national integration, historical revisionism, parallel institutions, and centralized cultural messaging that avoids intellectual diversity. Key divergences. He does not seek to see state power. He does not use violence. It is market-based, it's member-funded, and it functions within the bounds of legal pluralism. So, essentially, I'm just going to say, how many do we have here? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 against 4. I have to say it's proto-fascist. It breaks my heart as an Afrikaans person to say this, but there's just too much evidence. All of these things come together. Look, I don't like the EFF either, or the MK party, who are also proto-fascist. But essentially the only way to defeat these parties would be to step back from your proto-fascist leanings, at least scrap off like 2 or 3 of these attributes, so you just become plain vanilla cultural or plain vanilla nationalist, like not something more than that. And this exact same goes for the EFF and for MK. If you want to defeat like AfriForum or Solidarity, you need to step away from your extreme racism and your nationalism. Only then will Solidarity and AfriForum feel safe to also take it down a notch. So this is a bit like, I don't know, those of you who are Cold War nerds will be familiar with the incident of Checkpoint Charlie, where World War III almost started. And it was in West Berlin, where a Soviet and American tank confronted one another, and then the commanders radioed each other and they said, okay, I will go back 1 meter if you go back 1 meter. And then they did it, and they're like, okay, I'll go back another meter if you go back another meter. And they did that for a couple of hours, and eventually the entire situation there just de-escalated, you see. So I'm a very skeptical person of, achieving victory via confrontation and lawfare and military objectives. Like, rather see if you can talk to someone, or at least project yourself as something that's more loving than hateful. That's it. My references. Academic and theoretical works. Paxton, Robert, The Anatomy of Fascism, Knopf, 2004. Umberto Eco, Ur-Fascism, New York Review of Books, 1995. Stanley Payne, A History of Fascism, 1914 to 1945, Wisconsin, 1995. Stanley Jason, How Fascism Works, Random House, 2018. South African Context and Media. Solidarity official website, solidarity.coza. AfriForum and Academia's promotional material, 2018 to 2024. Kali Krill's public statements. Apartheid is not a crime against humanity, 2019. Mail and Guardian, Daily Maverick, News 24. Investigations on Soltec and language rights cases. The SAHRC, or Human Rights Commission on Race Relations and Hate Speech, 2017 to 2013. Stats Essay and Commission for Employment Equities annual reports. And finally, City Press, The Parallel State Inside Solidarity's Afrikaans Republic. That is all for now. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day. Bye-bye.